Thank you. Thanks very much, Nicola, and welcome everybody. It was really nice to see some very sunny backgrounds, be it outside or in your living rooms or your offices. So thanks very much for sacrificing such a lovely morning to be with us today. Hopefully we'll make it worth your while. My name's Grace Dyke. I'm here with my colleague Kirsty, and we run a social enterprise called Yellow Jigsaw. We've been doing that for the past 5 years, coming up to 6. And our main role is to help good causes to shout about their great work using PR in the media. And we started Yellow Jigsaw all those years ago, really after noticing that good causes and social enterprises have the best stories to tell, but they don't always have the capacity or the know-how to tell them. So that's where we come in. And so we've been helping charities, social enterprises, unis, housing associations to tell their stories and to get them seen and heard by their key audiences. A bit about me, I used to work at a national charity before we started at Yellow Jigsaw, and I was running national campaigns and events, so very much linked into the PR side of things, and that's where I met Kirsty. Would you like to say a bit about yourself, Kirsty?
Yeah, hi everybody. Lovely morning for it. I can see the sun outside, so that's nice. Always nice and uplifting. I'm Kirsty, and my background is very much in the media side of things. So straight out university, I went to work for MEM Media, Manchester Evening News Media, and I've worked across all of the Greater Manchester weekly newspapers as well as their regional publication. Anything from crime to health to supporting charities, business, social enterprise. So you name it, I've done it on the newspaper side. And as Grace said, from leaving there, we met at Alzheimer's Society, where I was the media and communications officer running campaigns across the whole of the Northwest. So we've brought those skills together to build Yellow Jigsaw and bring our passions for supporting charities and social enterprises through their PR needs.
So really looking forward to working with you today. And as Nicola mentioned, we will be working more intensively with 10 members of the Resilient Leaders programme. We haven't decided who that will be yet, but it will be partly decided by what happens today and what we get to learn from you all. So we'd really like to make the most of the chat facility. So if you're able to just do a little bit of an intro in the chat about who you are and the organisation that you're representing and what you'd like to get out of today's session, that would be great. We'll also be using the chat as we go through the workshop. We've got a few 10-minute tasks just to keep you on your toes and make sure you're still awake and with us. And we'll be breaking at around 11 a.m. as well, just for a leg stretch and a brew. Make another brew, of course. We'd like to kickstart with a question, which I'll hand over to Kirsty to ask.
Okay, so very much something to be thinking about. The question to you guys is, how many press releases, stroke emails do you think the Manchester Evening News desk gets on a daily basis? If you can just put your guesses in the chat, and then Grace can have a little readout of some of them for me.
So Karen's first in with 100. Oh, we've got, oh, Tina. Poor MEN News Desk. Tina suggested 10,000. So we've got a range here.
Probably is for the spam.
Yeah. From 100 straight through to 10,000. Emma and Claire say 200. Kim says 300. So a wide range there.
Okay, so very big wide range, and Kim, although I think she's got some inside knowledge, and she might have heard me say this before, but is spot on. So it's I've not been in the newsroom for a number of years, so it may have gone up, but between 300 and 400 emails on a daily basis, and I'm talking just to the news desk email, that's not the individual journalist as well. So getting that amount of information through on one day is really important for you to know, in terms of making sure that what you send them is something that they will definitely want to read and that it jumps out to them. Because of those 300 stories that they might get through, they probably only publish about 10% of them. So it's vital that what you're sending them is something that they really, really are interested in. It gets their attention, and it's got all of the information there that they need hooks them in, and they think that they can just quite easily copy and paste it onto a page, job done, and saves them so much time in terms of what they need to do. I think that's another really important thing for you to know is that, again, when I was starting out on the newspapers, the first paper I worked on was the Stockport Express. And at the time, when I started 12 years ago, it was 15 reporters, I think, on the news desk. And that same newspaper still exists, but only with one reporter doing the same quantity of news. So there's no less news pages, but much less reporters. So we can really help them in terms of sending in great press releases for them to use. But if they're not great, they're just going to move on very quickly through those emails and press delete and move on to the next story. So that really sets us up to be thinking about and understanding what types of stories journalists are looking for. So think about the types of journalists you are approaching, making sure it's the right one for your area. So whether that be that you are based in Salford, so you make sure you search out the right journalist that is working on your patch, or it might be that it's a particular area of need that you want to work with. So it could be education, it could be health, and you can still at business, it can seek out which one of those journalists again will be the right one for you to approach. The caveat around that is that always find those journalists and make connections with them, but still always be thinking about sending it to general news desks as well. Sorry, did somebody say something?
I've just sent you an email with a link and then another email showing you that I sent you the email. So you've had 2 emails. But what I was going to say is a lot of the content will be similar to what we did with Unlimited. So what I meant to suggest to you is whether or not you want to join the session or not. It does form a key part of us making a decision.
Nicola, could you put your comment in the chat because we're struggling to hear you?
Am I okay to carry on, or do you want me to wait until
You're fine.
Okay, great. So yeah, that's really important, linking in with those journalists. And second part of making sure that we're getting the most out of your business, charity, social enterprise is thinking about those newsworthy stories. So what you might have an idea of what you think is newsworthy might not necessarily be the same angle that the journalist wants to take. So it's thinking about how you can take a step back, think about it from an outsider's point of view, think about it from a non-organizational point of view, and what is the newsworthy part of what you're trying to get across to people. And we'll go into that a bit more as the session goes along. And then really importantly, the basics on how to write a press release. So as I said at the beginning, it's you're getting an inbox full of 300 forwarded emails, and which ones of those are written well, presented in the right way, has the right structure, for me to be able to easily, as the journalist at the news desk, feeling loads of pressure because I'm on a deadline, or I'm doing the work of 10 people, and how can somebody make that easy for me? And we will give you lots of templates, like Nicola said, to be able to work with that and go away and try them out. And you can always share those with us so we can help you along the way. Anybody commenting yet, Grace? So we should have said, really, if you have got questions along the way and you want to jump in, Grace is monitoring the chat as I go through. So we can always, she can read those out for us, or we can take you off mute if you've got a question that you want to ask along the way.
We've not got any questions, but a big welcome to Tina, Fee and Kim, who have all introduced themselves in the chat. So let's get following each other on Twitter and get to know each other's social enterprises.
Definitely. So that's what we want to go through today. And that leads us on to really about why we're working with the media. So Grace has just mentioned Twitter and how we should all be linking in with each other and connecting. And the first point on here, and a really big one, is about credibility. And I'm sure a lot of you, I know I do, when I'm thinking about how I consume my news these days, it is via social media more than anything else. So I will go on to Twitter or Facebook or wherever it is, that the platform that I use, and I will hear some breaking news or think about a story that that interests me. But I always then will go back to thinking, where has that story come from? Where do I need to get the credibility from? And I will then search out BBC News, Guardian, Manchester Evening News, and linking back to those news sites to think about whether it's something that I believe or want to take in. So don't underestimate the power of people still thinking about those news sites, those big news sites, as to what they want to link into, to what they take away from your story. So it is still massive in terms of what it can do for you, for your PR opportunities. And then also thinking obviously about your Google rankings for your websites, thinking about adding news stories to there and linking to them through your social media is still really important for making sure that that is getting boosted. So that's another great reason to be working with the media. This one's obviously self-explanatory. You've all got great stories to tell through your social media, through your social enterprises and charities. And the important thing is always about getting certain messages across. So thinking about what your call to action is and how you want to raise awareness for those organisations and increasing understanding about them. We can often get people say to us, well, how much more money is that going to bring in? And sometimes it's not always about fundraising, it's not always about attracting people to certain positions or volunteering. It can just simply be about making sure that you're getting seen and heard. And just like advertising, getting articles in the press is very much about planting that seed of people's knowledge about you in the local area. So a great reason to be using the media. And it also obviously increases your reach to a wider audience. So depending on where you're based, you will, many of you will have your local newspapers and local radio stations, mini TV stations, in terms of where you can use that very local and hyper-local based media support. And then you've got the more regional and northwest areas in terms to cover as well. So the reach is fantastic in terms of how you want to use the media for that. And on top of the awareness and understanding, we're thinking about how we can attract support. So whatever it is you want to get out of that, whether it's that you do want to attract people to do fundraising for you, donors, volunteers, and all of those can be brought into your news stories and to get more attention to your organisations. A lot of you as well, being charities and social enterprises, will be wanting to run campaigns and influence change, and linking with the media is vital to be able to do that. So it's really important to get those messages across in there, get partnerships to work with, try and get them to link in with you. So it could maybe be a series of stories that you could do for a campaign and to influence change. So again, just some great reasons why you need to be working with the media. And one which we all like as social enterprises and charities, that it's really cost effective. So thinking about a half-page advert in the likes of the Manchester Evening News, it could cost you anything from between £500 to £1,000 if you were paying for that as advertising or promotional space. So if you get the same amount of space in that newspaper as a story, as an article, then it's fantastic to be thinking about how that is cost effective for you, and also great to be bringing back to your boards and people who are wanting to show the worth of what you're doing in the media, because sometimes it can be difficult for people to understand it unless it's in monetary terms. So it's good to show that it's raising awareness, but also to show that it's saving money and building your profile. Any questions, anybody?
No questions, just some really interesting introductions, which I'm sure I can bring in to use as examples when we go through for your newsworthy angles.
Can I just apologise as well if I sound a bit snuffly? I'm really suffering with hay fever today. I'm trying to stop a sneeze every 2 minutes, so apologies for that.
You're hiding it well, Kirsty.
Thank you. So obviously, in terms of then working with the media, you have to ensure that you have got a story that they really want to listen to and tell. So your hook is the most important thing to be thinking about. So if I was still sat at the Manchester Evening News on the news desk, I'd be thinking about what has drawn me to that particular email that's come through. Why have I taken the time to follow it up? Or even better, that I've just been able to copy and paste it straight into my the space for it in the newspaper. So think about your hook. And Grace and I always talk about it as passing the pub test. Might be the cafe test to you, the restaurant test, whatever that may be. And good news for some of us, possibly, that the pub test may be able to come back into action soon. Aren't the pubs opening again at some point in the near future? So that pub test is all about what you would tell your mates when you went into the pub about this great story. There's something that's happened within your organisation, and what is the first thing that you tell them? That passes the pub test for us. And I can guarantee that doesn't start with you talking about how an organisation is doing X, Y, and Z to improve something for somebody, or to make change. It would be the other way around. It'd be thinking about how it is about the people that you are supporting to do something. So think about how you present that in to the newsrooms, in terms of the way you put it. We are all here because we want to do stuff for our organisations, because it means it is going to help people or support people or boost something or raise awareness. But we don't have to put the organisation first in that, we can put the person. And so it's really very much about people all the way through any PR opportunities that we talk about. We also need to be thinking about how it is timely. So if you've had a great event, fundraising, you've launched a campaign, but you haven't told the press about it for another 4 weeks after that, then the chances are that it is less likely for them to be able to want to use it, because it has missed their time frame in terms of how they would want to be shouting about that. The one caveat I'd put around that is, if you have got that and you have missed the opportunity, try and think about what else you can link into. So Grace and I are a big fan of things like awarenessdays.co.uk, and if there is something else coming up that means that you can reshare that tale or story when you've missed the first PR opportunity with it, or how you can continually have it on a timeline where you can think you can hook into different things, then think about those, but always try and get it in a timely manner in order for that to work best for you with those PR opportunities. And there's an old phrase, isn't there, about a picture tells 1,000 words. So you can have the best story in the world, but if it has got a picture of the back of people's heads, or it's blurry, or you haven't got a picture at all, then you're going to go from that smashing £800 worth half-page article, full-page article, to maybe something that we call a nib, a news in brief, which has only got 30 to 100 words in it, compared to 400 or 500 words. So bring your story to life with great pictures, and we talk about those a bit more later on in the session, but it really is a massive difference in terms of the space that you would get. The other side of visuals, it's not always photos. Think about what else can boost your story. Can you bring in certain data journalism? So is it that you've got a great graph or pie chart or visual that can show what is actually happening in your organisation, that brings it to life? So what stats have you got that you can present in a visual way that makes it jump out to that journalist? The other aspect, which we touched on before, is that thinking about where it works for you. So thinking about your local areas. So if you are in Salford, think about how you could be used in the hyperlocal news, so online newspaper Salford Now, or how you can do Salford City Radio, or if it's a local TV that you particularly want to go into, think about all those that work in your hyperlocal area, and then reach up towards the more regional ones, but think about how you might need to change your wording or your angle slightly when you're moving out of the hyperlocal area. There's nothing worse than getting a news release when you're at a newspaper and somebody's put and a PR person rings you and says, "Oh, I've got a great story for you in your area," and then they will just put it's in the northwest, and you find out that actually it's in Yorkshire, because somebody in London didn't know the difference between where the areas were. So really think about it, because it is a massive turn off. If you haven't got my attention in the first couple of lines of your email, then the chances are that it's going to be deleted.
Yeah.
And then the final point, that it's non-promotional. So just being really careful that you're not sounding like an advert. I know you know that your organisation is great, but I want to hear from other people about whether the organisation is great. So don't tell me a great charity has done this in the intro. Tell me a charity has done a great thing, or a person has received great help from a charity, and then tell me within your quotes, and one from your organisation or a person from your organisation can be quoted, but two, even better, get somebody else to say that it's been fantastic, the person that you've helped. So that brings in making sure that it's non-promotional, so they can say, I had the most fantastic experience, it has changed my life. But if that had just been said in the main body of the article rather than in somebody's quote, I start to wonder about the authenticity of it. So really important for you to get other people to do the talking for you.
Yeah.
Very loosely, we have 3 categories that I would say types of news stories that you can have for your organisations. We've all got them, no matter which area you work in terms of what your organisation's doing. I know Grace has been making a note of those. We will all have a quirky, a human interest and a hard news angle to be able to fit in to the news agendas that are happening at the moment, or to hook into a certain awareness day that's happening. So a few examples of those, and Grace always likes to tell this one, so I'll hand over to her to tell us a great Wiganer story for our quirky angle.
My favourite quirky press story example ever. So I live in Wigan, and what is Wigan famous for? We had 2 answers on Saturday. So
yeah, we did.
Pies.
Yes.
Hi, straight in. Thank you. Kim says puddings. Someone said rugby. Okay, close second, but yeah, it's pies. So it's not out of the ordinary really for Wigan to have a pie story, and it's not necessarily out of the ordinary for Wigan to be wanting to talk about their annual pie eating competition. So bearing this in mind, that it's not particularly newsworthy in itself, they thought, how can we make it into a newsworthy story? So they thought, we'll make it a quirky story, and what they decided to do was send a pie into space.
Of course,
why wouldn't you do that? So they worked with the local college, so worked with local students, and somehow fitted a video camera to this pie. So they had this great video footage of this pie ascending in the air through the clouds above Wigan, and that became the news story. And through that quirkiness, they were then able to get in their key message about this pie eating competition happening. And not only did they secure regional news coverage, but they got national, they got international coverage. So it's a brilliant example of the pub test. Of course, that's the first thing you're going to tell your mates down the pub. Not that Wigan are going to have yet another pie eating competition, but that they're sending a pie into space. And how they've thought about how they can make that news story non-promotional and make it about the story and the angle rather than about the organisation.
Yeah, still one of my favourite examples as well. So
yeah, so we're going to have another test, aren't we? As well as always do the pub test. It's what's your pie in the sky?
Pie into space test. Yeah, yeah, we like to do that. So just as to carry on from that, so I'm going to use what we're living through at the moment. I'm sure we're all sick of hearing about the pandemic and coronavirus, but I think as a story, it's a great example about how you might not necessarily think that it wouldn't be anything but hard news, something that affects lots of people. But there are different examples that you can use in terms of how you can have a quirky human interest or hard news angle on something that is affecting everybody at the moment. So the quirky angle, it doesn't have to be quite a pie into space. It doesn't always have to be out there as that, although if you've got that option, always go for it. But we can think of someone like Sir Tom Moore, Sir Tom now, but thinking about how that started off as just a simple story of somebody doing a walk, and how that really boosted it for him, and how everybody got into it. And I can think of another example as well. So near me, there's been lots of people doing runs around the streets to keep kids entertained in superhero costumes. And it's basically that they've been wanting to promote their children's party services, but that's not what they talked about. What they did was make sure that they went around onto the streets to set and use the story angle of entertaining your children through lockdown. So it meant that they stay in your head, you puts a smile on your face, but also then you will remember when in need that you will want to use their party services next time that comes along. the human interest angle, and I would argue every one of these categories always has a human interest angle in it. We're always thinking about people when we're thinking about news. The nature of us as human beings is that we care about what other people are doing, and generally what other people are doing who look like us, feel like us. I would be looking at stories that affect mums. I really draw me in because I'm a mum and that's something that I want to read about. So think about what your human interest angle is. And again, using the pandemic example, it's thinking about how we would do a profile story on maybe a nurse or a doctor who has been supporting people, or how somebody has overcome something in their business in order to make it through lockdown, or how they've been supporting the community through food banks, etc. So always bringing the people into the story. And the hard news angle of that would be something that would obviously involve the stats and how it's been affecting the whole country, well, in this case, the whole world, and how you would be talking about how many people have been affected on a daily basis. So hard news stories tend to have something that affects a whole nation, a whole area, a whole region, and it has stats that you can pull out for it, but will also have interviews from people too. So that's how you define those three areas. And that's how I would always base what you would do in your PR planning strategy around which types of stories can you link into for those quirky human interest and hard news angles across a 12-month PR strategy. But that's also not to forget that there's other pages of the newspaper. So with your hard news, you'd be looking at your front page news stories, or the first couple of pages in. Your quirky one is likely to meet page 3 or page 5 because they tend to come with great images, and they have to come with great images in order for them to work. And then your human interest stories can be spread out across those pages and tend to be on the right hand side ones, those even numbers, which are the most well read pages in the newspaper. But that's not to forget that you can also really utilize other pages in the newspaper too. So never underestimate the power of a letters page. It's still one of the most well-read pages within a newspaper and online too. It takes obviously different forms online. People will still send in letters, or they will put comments on stories. So think about how you can do that. You can very much send in stuff from your organisation to say what you've been doing to support a local community on a letters page and calling for people to join in. We've seen it plenty of times how charity CEOs do that and write into newspapers, and often journalists will look at those as to how can it be moved from a letters page to be a story. So we would look at them and think, is this just for the letters page, or can we think and get in touch with this person and develop it as a bigger story too? So it's just another way to get into the news, but through the back door. And then there's also thinking about your what's on pages. So it doesn't always have to be a 300, 400 word press release. You can just send a 50 or 100 word what's on news in brief, and then it would be able to get onto those pages. And not forgetting how you can have, Grace was talking about audio clips before, but also little videos that you can bring. If I think about the MEN as a template for that, more often than not, every news story that's on their online publication and the likes of I Love Manchester, they have all got video clips or great imagery or audio to go along with those. So it really boosts your chances of getting those main spaces within the newspaper or online publication. And outside of your straight news press releases, whether it's quirky, human interest or hard news, you also need to be thinking about yourselves as being expert commentators, so having opinion pieces that you can pitch to journalists in terms of whatever your subject matter is, whether that's education, health, well-being, and how you can really utilise those either by pitching them first or sending in your opinion pieces as a full story. And also listicles, so they are ways in which you can utilise something by saying top 10 things to do in Salford. You can tell Salford's like a spiritual home. I've used that as the same example every time. But within that, you can be one of those top 10 things to do in Salford, or top 10 ways to stay happy in Salford. And you can be one of those. And not only can you big up other organisations, but you are in it, but not overtly talking about your own organisation. So really think about how you can utilise things like that. Any questions, Grace?
We've had one question, a really interesting one from Jess, about protecting the people that you work with who might feature in a news story. So we've had a little chat about the importance of media consent forms, but also about the control that you have when you're working with the press, and that if you send in a press release complete with quotes, it's within your code of ethics as a journalist, isn't it, Kirsty? You cannot change the quotes that you've sent in.
No, and it's the safest way to do it in terms of supplying somebody with a quote. So if you've sent me something in a written form and it's got the name, the age of the person, the area they're from, a fantastic quote, there's really no need for me to get back in touch with you on a phone call to change that. Code of ethics says that you would never change the sense of somebody's quote, so no, that's not something they can do. The other part of that is, though, because this is something we have definitely come across on both sides of the fence, is that people don't always want to supply full names, or they might not always necessarily want to give their age or the area that they're from, and that does become a bit of a barrier sometimes for certain medias, that if you can't fully name somebody or say specifically where they live, i.e. An area of Trafford, so Sale rather than just Trafford, because it's very distinct in terms of where they live. So thinking about all those things, and as Grace said, whether it's print, online, radio, TV, just to know that you are always in control of how much information you give the journalist. So what you give them is very much in your hands.
What was I going to add to that? Just that obviously you've got less control when you're doing an interview as well, and you know, you don't really want to be in the position where someone you work with is then being interviewed. And that would never happen in any organisation of any size, where a comms person wouldn't ultimately be in control of that conversation in some way. So don't feel like you have to be lining up journalists to start interviewing the people you work with. You can keep the control. But another point just to highlight is you don't have to say yes to every media request, and the information is out there to make an informed decision as to whether that newspaper or that journalist or that news site is right for you and your organisation. So, you know, have a bit of a common sense approach to it. You know, if someone from the Daily Mail who has done some scathing pieces on migrant workers wants to get in touch with Claire from Heart and Parcel, you know that it's probably not going to be in line with your mission and your values. So the information's out there on the news websites as to what these journalists have written in the past, so that you can do a little bit of digging just to check. I mean, in reality, what we're advising that you do is that you do that research in the beginning. So you're proactive, you find someone that's written a story that is totally in line and supports what it is that you're trying to do, and you use that as a way to sell yourself in and say, love this article that you've done, you might be interested in such and such that we work with that's actually benefited from our approach to help with this issue. But we'll be going into the selling into the press later, won't we, Kirsty?
And another little point you just made there, Grace, is that a lot of journalists have got a big ego. So if you can demonstrate to them that you know stories that they've written, it's going to set you in good stead for starting the rest of that conversation. So thinking about those quirky human interests and hard news angles, we've got a few for you here to have a bit of a guess on. So just a quick recap. So quirky is something where it's very much image-based, it's fun, it's light-hearted, and it brings out a new angle to a story that might not otherwise have sparked the interest of the journalist. The human interest stories are very much put people at the centre of them, so it leads with the person. And hard news is something that affects a lot of people in society. So a little bit of a quiz for you, put it in the chat. First one up. So we have got fundraisers attempt to break world record for longest distance danced in a conga line. Easy for me to say. So Grace, if we've got some attempts at guesses, what angle do we think this is? Quirky, human interest, or hard news?
Okay.
Quirky's coming out. Yeah, lots of quirky suggestions. Quirky got to be, Claire says.
Well, it's great to know that the information we've already told you has helped you along the way with that. So yeah, you're all spot on. It's definitely a quirky news story. So having worked on a news desk for a number of years, that the amount of stories that you get sent through about fundraising attempts or how much money a charity has raised, it's not really big news. But so you've got to think about how you can bring a difference to proceedings when you're sending that through to us. So what brings this story to life? The photo, it's great in terms of the way that they've positioned themselves, what they're doing. It's different, it's nice, it draws me in. They've thought about bringing the world record attempt in for the conga line, rather than it just being something else that's just an average fundraiser. And it's at the train station as well, which links into their organisation. So all of those things were a tick box, and they got a very prominent position because of all of those things coming together. So it works great as a quirky news story. What about this one? Quirky, human interest, or hard news? Jess Kemp heading on first European tour thanks to Salford charity.
A lot of human interest suggestions coming in.
Good. So yeah, again, spot on. This is the human interest angle, and why does it work as a human interest story? So they could have very much written this story another way around. It could have been Earlham and Cadishead charity, Hamilton Davis Trust help singer to go on European tour, which is not as interesting as putting the person at the forefront of that. So it's a young person, a local person, and it's giving you a bit of information about her packing up a guitar and going out on a first European tour thanks to that charity. So the charity is still getting the praise, and as would your social enterprise or charity in terms of any human interest stories that you'd be putting in. But putting that person, that case study at the forefront of the story is what we all care about. We've probably got friends, daughters, sisters who would have loved this opportunity. So hearing about somebody else would just draws us into the situation. And by process of elimination, this news story falls into which category? I'm not going to wait if you don't.
It's hard news.
Yeah, it's hard news. So again, as I said at the beginning, that human interest always plays a part in any of our stories. So it is a situation where it is affecting a mass population, so young people as a group, but young people also gives us that human interest where it will draw onto the heartstrings. As a mum, I don't want to think about how a young person of mine would be in lots of debt, so it draws you in to be thinking about that. And it has figures in there, so they're using a survey about how much debt young people are in. So it brings that all together in terms of people, something that affects a mass population, and also having some statistics in there. The rest of the story also heard from somebody who was in debt and from an expert in terms of how that could be solved and the reasons why. So it brings all of that together for a hard news story. So I hope that's really helps in terms of how you can plan your PR activity and strategy with all the different areas of your work and that your organisation does. And I guarantee if you sit and think about that, you'll think of a story that can fall into each of those categories. Which, are we doing break first, Grace, or after? After. So leads us on nicely to be thinking about you getting creative with these. So we're just going to give you 10 minutes to think about an example of the types of news stories that you could have with your organisations and the work that you do that would fall into each of those categories. So be as creative as you like with the quirky one. Send your pie into space if that works for you, or think about what it could be that works for your organisation. Think about the people that you work with for your human interest angle. How can you put them at the forefront of that story? And then think about what your organisation does for the hard news stories and the impact it has because of something that's happening in the news agenda at the moment. So If you can't think about things that are happening currently, just think about them as a plan for the future as to how this could work and different scenarios as to how that would work for you. So we'll give you 10 minutes. Grace, do you want people to put their ideas in the chat?
Yeah, so not all of them, don't worry about that. But if we could have one example of any, doesn't have to be all 3 types of news stories from each of you, that would be really great. And from your introductions, I've just made a few notes on potential examples or ideas to get you started. So an obvious one is Kim, as she knows from Visit from the Stalk. So Kim has been supporting a lot of women who have babies, who are most disadvantaged at the moment and may have lost their jobs or no access to benefits during COVID. So she's been delivering emergency welfare packages. So you can see how that could be a human interest story where she could really put the spotlight on one of the mums that she's worked with to highlight the impact that COVID has had on this group of people. She could also turn that into a hard news story to talk about the number of mums that she's worked with across Greater Manchester and what the actual figure is and what's happening with the gap of those mums that aren't getting support at the moment. Emma from Social Research Partners does research and evaluation on issues affecting older people. So again, you can see how you could do a hard news piece on an issue that affects a lot of older people, but then turn that same topic into a human interest piece where you focus in on one older person that you've worked with and you tell their story through an interview. Jess is doing something really interesting, animating public spaces using digital means. Now that's really relevant now because all of our public spaces, I imagine, need to be revived. And is this a way of doing it? So you can link it into COVID. Definitely some opportunity for that to be a quirky story, I would have thought. If you can do something really quirky and out of the ordinary in these public spaces, that would be a great story, particularly if it's a public space that's really well known. So a takeover of Piccadilly Gardens or whatever it might be. But then it could also be a human interest story if it's a public space that's affecting lots of local businesses and a local business owner is using their experiences to say how important it is that our public spaces get used again. Claire at Heart and Parcel supports women from migrant communities to learn English through cookery classes. So obvious links there to hard news stories that link to the wider news agenda that affects that population, but also the human interest story. So I won't give you all the answers, but I'm hoping that helps to illustrate how your work can be moulded into those different types of news story. So we'll give you until 5 to 11, and then we'll come back, have a little bit of a chat of your favourite angle that you shared in the chat before we then have a break.
Lovely. Get to it.
So Jess, who does the animation of public spaces using digital means, has a quirky one. Digital 3D insects from exotic locations can be found all over Salford's Peel Park.
Oh, I love that.
I like that quirky story. Bit of an invasion of insects.
I love the photos.
Yeah, the quirky does rely on a great photo to accompany it, doesn't it, Kirsty?
It does, yeah. Yeah, that works really well, not only for the media, but as a social media presence too, which is the other thing we should be highlighting, really, that this all works as part of a PR plan that would go into your social media work as well.
Claire from Heart and Parcel has a quirky story, folding dumplings to make friends and learn English. You can imagine the nice smiley faced photo that goes along with that of people making dumplings. And then quite a few examples, I think, within the human interest angle. So the women they've been working with have been setting up their own catering classes, cooking workshops to develop their English language skills, whilst at the same time mentoring and equipping others. Hard news, the wider issues that surround our project and the users of our provision, so immigration, gender inequality, misinformation of certain communities in the mainstream media, so challenging those stereotypes and misrepresentation. What would be great is for every single one of those hard news issues there's someone you've worked with who's willing to tell their personal account and story of that, which is why it's great to have this, or start to begin this process of having media consent forms as part of your induction, and then you're building up this infrastructure where when this national story breaks, for example, you've got racism as an example there, well, that couldn't be more relevant now. You've already got the consent, you've already got somebody in mind who has previously said they'd be happy to share their story. So it just makes the process a lot easier. I mean, that's our biggest barrier really at Yellow Jigsaw when working with clients who have vulnerable beneficiaries, that we need the case studies. That's what makes a story. We like reading about people, and trying to make that a habit that you've spoken to someone, they've told you how much your service has changed their lives, that you just add into that conversation. That's really, really brilliant to hear, and it's really important that we get to share those stories so that we can continue doing the work that we're doing. Would you be happy to share that story in the media, and then start that conversation to get the media consent in place?
It also arms you with the fact that if you've got them all lined up, that if people have done certain hard news stories, that you can, rather than sending them a full story in response to that, you can say, I've got somebody who can share a story about their experiences of the story you broke yesterday, so that there can be a follow-up in terms of how you can develop that story and be ready to go with them as a case study or an interview on BBC Radio Manchester or whatever that may be.
Kim says she struggles to think of quirky stuff because hard news is so ingrained in her from being a journalist, but it sounds like she's come up with a really great one, which is volunteer cycles over 300 miles across Greater Manchester to deliver baby essentials during COVID, which is a really feel-good story. And on that note, Andy Burnham's office is always looking for stories to share which show the spirit of GM, particularly at the moment. They want to showcase how people across Greater Manchester have reached out and helped other people. So I'll put the hashtag in the chat, and every time you're sharing even just a good news tweet, it might not be a full story, ideally it would be. If you use this tweet, then it may get picked up by the office of Andy Burnham and go out through the GMCA comms, which is a quick tip.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways that you can add to that quirky story as well. You know, can you be dressed up on these bikes in certain, you know, as
a stork?
As a stork, yeah, or a baby, whichever takes your fancy. And then also making it quite tangible. So what we like about the pie one is that it's going to space or reaching the moon. I recently did a challenge where it was like getting people to cycle around the world. So if you could do it sort of hitting certain landmarks across Greater Manchester, then people really buy into it much more.
I had one from Katie Finney. Hi, Katie. I mean, I can't see you on my screen, but I know you're here, and I've not spoken to you for a while, so it's nice to have you on the Zoom. She's got a hard news / human interest, and it's Amity partnered with the Co-op Foundation to bring heart, humanity and inclusion to the journey of making GM's tech sector the best place in the world to work for people from BAME communities. I think with this, it would be putting it through the pub test, would you, Kirsty, and think, what would we lead with? It may not necessarily be Amity partnering with the Co-op Foundation. I think that's a great way to lead on your website when you want to do a blog on this and you want to showcase your credibility working with the likes of Co-op, and you share that blog on Twitter and on your LinkedIn. But for a news story, I think it would have to start with the BAME communities. And so the people from those communities who feel like they have been shut out, or that they feel hopeful that GM is the best place for them to be working in the tech sector, and then the partnership follows that human interest angle.
Yeah, human interest will start with the tech sector. So rather than it being the organisations, think about tech sector as groups of people, so that this tech sector is supporting this group of people, or vice versa. So taking the organisation is the second part of that.
And for the hard news, if there's any stats on that highlight why this is a problem, and why it needs to be addressed. That would be the angle for that.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
Thank you.
Great ideas coming through. Sorry, I can't help you out, Grace. I can't look at the chat.
There's so many. It's amazing. You're all absolutely brimming with PR opportunities here.
I can't look at the chat while I'm screen sharing, so Grace is having to sift through them all.
Iabo, quirky, in-flight relaxation packages repurposed as care packages for staff. Who's done that? That caught my eye. I'm imagining someone with some like in-flight eye mask on, but at home.
Sorry, I bought them from online, I think through John Lewis.
Oh, right.
For staff. And then when staff received them, because I hadn't actually seen them, so I didn't realise on the packaging it was for in-flight. So it had like hand sanitizer, some kind of perfumed, I don't know, some kind of perfume spray and earplugs. And apparently it's for in-flight sort of relaxation. But obviously, because there were no flights going out, they'd reduced the price, and so it's become a kind of care package and stuff. I just thought that was hilarious.
I mean, I can see the photo in my head, like, you know, that you've got a member of staff leaning back on a reclining chair, like simulating the fact that they're on a flight, but they can't actually go anywhere. So it's like knowing about them at home. Yeah. So it's really one to jump on it in this current climate if you're doing that now.
Debbie shares a lovely one, which could be hard news and human interest. So they delivered a project called Make a Card and Share a Smile, making cards and distributing to older people who are socially isolated. So you can see that being a human interest story with an older person clutching their card, smiling, and with a quote about how grateful they were to feel connected to their community as a result of receiving their card. But then the hard news is highlighting this issue around social isolation. So Debbie makes the point that they had so much demand that they struggled to meet everybody's requests. So could that then be linked into stats in GM? You could perhaps talk to the Aging Better team at GMCA and see if they will have figures on the number of people aged 70 plus who live alone in Greater Manchester, and what that has meant for those people during lockdown and after lockdown. So many angles from that one story. Val created a blog to raise awareness of asylum-seeking mums who needed knitted clothing for their babies. The Knitting Baby Clothes Appeal generated over 35 knitters, mostly from ladies who were self-isolating during coronavirus. This quirky story hit on human interest because it gave the ladies an understanding of their own value in the community. They could make a contribution. I'm going to make an assumption here, and it could be a generalised one, so sorry if that's the case, but if they were older women, if they were self-isolating, they were knitters, if they were older women that had used their time and skills to knit clothing for asylum-seeking mums, that is such a powerful example of community cohesion that flies in the face of the Daily Mail type coverage, which would lead you to believe that there are divisions between those two groups of people. So that would be a really, really strong human interest story, would you say, Kirsty?
Yeah, and it can, you know, it's even if you only got a couple of hundred words out of it, having that connection of a smiling older person with a big string of knitting, and then the journey it goes on to where it's going to is great. So yeah, really like it.
I'm going to break the rules here because I know we're on mute really, but I'd imagine that one, I just wonder how you get from that first 100 words or that first PR opportunity into developing relationships with journalists where they're looking for more. I'm thinking of, I saw that content as like a magazine piece where you could almost have like a load of kind of, I don't know, wool with all these stringy bits coming out where you actually get to hear who are these women and what are they being doing, or I don't know. For me, it's like
that's a nice idea.
It's a kind of I've come across them that there are journalists. It's almost a different way where you've got to almost develop a relationship with certain journalists to be like an interest piece for them that they're wanting to follow, and definitely. And
relationship with newspaper journalists is very different to that with a magazine journalist to begin with anyway, and thinking about your lead times on that. A lot of magazines are planning in their stories 3 or 4 months in advance of when they actually come out, so it's a very different relationship to what you would have with a newspaper journalist in that sense. And you're so right about building the relationships, and I don't want to disparage my profession here, but we can also be a little bit lazy in terms of like, so if I get a good connection with you with one story and it was presented to me really well and I got a great picture to go along with it, you were easy to contact and get a quote from, then the next time I've got a story that involves somebody that's about asylum seekers or even knitting grannies, you are going to be the next person that I come to, because I know that you are going to respond to me in a positive way. So building those relationships for one successful story tends to lead on to the next opportunity well.
Cool. And I just think, there's something we probably need to do.
That answers your question, Michaela.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I think it's being confident to share their story through your channels as well. So making it really clear that you've got these great, good news stories, and it may start off as, blog content of Mrs. X and Mrs. Y, who never would have crossed paths if it wasn't for this knitting connection. And so you're showcasing to journalists that you have the case studies and the real people who are ready to share their stories.
Cool. That's good.
That's all amazing. I'm just blown away by how many examples you've been able to come up with in 10 minutes. So even if you get one of these ideas through to press coverage, that is really powerful for your organisations. So we'll hold that thought there. We are going to save the chat and go into more detail, have a look at your ideas as part of that Resilient Leaders Intensive PR Support Selection process, which makes it sound very formal. But for now, you've used your brains. You can now have a break. So shall we say a 5-minute break, come back at about 11:15 once you've had a brew and a bit of a leg stretch?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Awesome. See you in 5.
Hello, how are we doing?
Good. Something's been pinging and buzzing away. I don't know if you'll had a load of emails and calls, but
that'd be me emailing Kirsty. Have we got a few people that we're waiting for? I know, Iyaba, your camera's off and you're on mute. Just say here in the chat if you're here.
Yeah, I think we're there pretty much.
Yeah?
Still here.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, just eating a scone.
Everyone got a brew or a scone if you're lucky. They're very nice. So are we happy to crack on?
Yeah, be great.
Great. Okay, so we've thought about our different styles of stories, how to get in touch with those journalists, present your ideas. So we're very much moving into the structure of things now, because as I said right at the beginning, is really important to have the best structure for the stories that you are sending in, because you can have the best stories to tell, and we've heard some of them in the chat that you've just been sharing with Grace, that you have got some of the best stories to tell, but if they're not presented in the right manner, they're not going to make it through those 400 emails that a news desk gets on a daily basis. So thinking about your structure of your press release is vital to the success of those stories. So that's why we do it in this inverted triangle. We're thinking about all the important information being at the top of this triangle. So that will be at the top of your news story. So have your catchy title. Think about those important information that you're going to have in the first couple of paragraphs. That's really important, because it's very much the opposite way around to a novel. We don't want to be left with the at the moment right at the end. We want to know the punchline right at the beginning of our story. And taking you a bit back to school really, but we need those all important 5 W's in there when we're thinking about that. So the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why. So we know everything as the reporter, and as the sub-editors, it has all the important information up there, because sub-editors can be ruthless and they will just start cutting from the bottom. So if you've got everything that you need to say in those first couple of paragraphs, you send 400 words, which I would say is the ideal amount to send for a general press release. but they've only actually got space for 200 of those. It makes it really easy for them to be able to cut it down. Yeah. On top of your important vital information that you're going to be sharing, you need to be having lively and engaging quotes. So as we said earlier, this can be a spokesperson and a real case study, depending on what the story is, as to which way you would present those quotes. So if it's a human interest story, the first person I want to hear from is that person, that human who is relating to that story, and you need to be really emotive in your language in this. So this is where you can be saying something's fantastic, great, or you're outraged, or you're delighted with something. So bring all of that in there. So you're making sure that it really sounds like that person. Don't think it has to be formal. I want to hear the voice of that person come through in that quote. And then at the bottom of that, you have your less important detail, that added information and the background details that you want to get in there, but might not necessarily get included. And then you can always add on to, outside of your 300, 400 words, a brief notes to editor, so that people can have the journalist can have a look at that and think, is there anything else that I want to add in there, or making sure that I know that I can get in touch with somebody if there's another question that I want to be asking about the press release that's been sent through. And if they've got right down to the bottom of that triangle to the background detail, then they're really interested. So job done in terms of sending over a great structure for a press release. Any questions on the way you want to structure that?
No questions in the chat.
Great. So here's a good example for you. Well, a bad example as it happens, but so this is a real life press release that came through to the Stockport Express. For those of you who can't see your screen that well, it's Disco Fever comes to Stockport. If you're a fan of 70s and 80s soul and disco, then get your flares and flashing dance floors ready, because you're in for a treat. And it goes on to tell me who's performing in the list, and then further information about where it's going to be held, dates, etc. So this was given a rewrite, and the second example of this successfully made it into the press, so into the Stockport Express, into the South Manchester Reporter. So you can still have that fun element to it. You still want to get people enticed. So you're still telling them that Disco Fever comes to Stockport. So you're putting the area in there, and vitally what they're doing it for. So Beechwood is the biggest cancer care charity within that area, and it wasn't mentioned in the bad example, hidden away right at the bottom here in terms of what they were doing it for. And don't even mention that it was for a particular silver wing appeal, which was to try and get an extension built to raise £100,000 for the charity in terms of what they were doing. So then you can still go on to give them information about what that event is going to have there, but we don't very often see lists presented in news stories, so you have to make sure that that is presented in the right way for it to attract me, and to make sure I can do my quick copy and paste job on it. And then you've got quotes from the chief executive who's running the event, and then from the fundraiser from the organisation that they're running it for. So it has all of that information in there for them, and how to get in touch with people in order to support the appeal as well. So it just goes to show how much just little tips on improving the way that you present something can really improve your chances of getting into the press.
Just on that note, you're moving on to the template here. That can look a little bit overwhelming, but we will be supplying after the workshop a template that you can use, which will break down your story into that structure that was on that triangle, starting with your who, what, where, when, why, and your quotes to follow, so that it'll, if you suffer from writer's block, as we all do at some point, the template can really help with that.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say about the writer's block situation is that I will quite often still now will write down everything that I think needs to be included in the story, in not necessarily in a particular order, but then think about which parts of those I need to pull out to be at the top. And more often than not, my headline to the story is the last thing that I will write, because I've got the sense and the structure of how I want the story to be. So yeah, as Grace said, well, you can have a go of writing your own press releases using the templates that we're going to supply. And as we always say from these sessions, if you want to share some of those ideas with us, we'd be more than happy excuse me, to feed back to you in terms of what you send over to us. So a checklist for you to take away with that, as we've run through in the session, is thinking about that all-important angle to your story. So thinking about whether you are doing your quirky, your human interest, or your hard news story that you're linking into, which journalists you're going to be targeting for that particular angle, because you've now got this great list of journalists that you know will be interested in certain stories because of their specialism or the areas that they cover. And then thinking about your hook too, so that pub test, what is your pie into space? You need to be thinking about how that's going to work for you and your organisation. And we've all got facilities on our computers now, but I can't say I'm the best at spelling or grammar, but we can always make sure that we have those checks over to get rid of any errors that we have in there. So again, it's just really easy for the journalists to be able to copy and paste what you've written into their templates that they have now. Really stick to a simple format of what you're writing. We don't really need to hear that somebody exclaimed something. We just want to hear whether they said, says, or added. It just needs to be really simple writing in terms of your press release. And as we know, if you have more importantly for those hard news angles, but thinking about any stats that you're including in your stories, just making sure that they're accurate and that you can back them up in terms of where you've got them from or how they've been gathered, because we're going to want to know that in the newsroom as to where those statistics have come from to be able to use them. And on top of accuracy, be thinking about how you present those too. As we said about having those visuals that can sometimes bring that data to life, can really help the journalist. Accuracy point again, so thinking about the dates and the times and the places that you are including in your press releases is really important. As we said with the places one, so you can particularly target those media outlets that are relevant to you, and you don't start to annoy certain journalists because you're contacting them about a story that's in Salford but they cover Sale. So it's just thinking about the ones that you really want to link into. Another one that goes with the spelling and grammar really, but thinking about your punctuation and getting all of that right. It's all leading up to the fact that we want to make sure that we've got this package that is really easy and simple for them to use. And this sounds like it's a no-brainer really, but making sure that you have your contact details that are correct. But the amount of times that I've had stories and we're on a deadline in the newsroom and people have sent you an email, which is great, so you've got that one contact and piece of contact information, but I'm only an hour away from needing this to go to print. People aren't replying to emails, and a phone number that's been added to it or not added at all might not necessarily be the correct information. So really check over what you're sending people in order to make sure that the journalists can get in touch with you, because it could be a print deadline that we're looking to and they've decided on the last minute that they want to include your story, or it might be that you're getting an opportunity to go on the radio and TV who are renowned for only giving you a very short space of time in order to be ready and prepared to be going on for that. So just be really careful with your checklist and have that somewhere, keep it somewhere safe for you to look over once you're getting used to writing these press stories.
Kirsty, you've had a question from Kim. Are they allowed to put a byline if they copy and paste your story? Lol. So by
Yes.
byline we mean claim it as their own.
Unfortunately, Kim, yes they are.
I mean, is it unfortunately? Because one of the main reasons to work with the press is so that you have that objective support for your story.
Yeah.
If the news is deeming it worthy enough to report on it and it's a journalist reporting on your story, I'm going to think that's more credible than if Kim tells me what she's doing is right. Although it may suck that they are then claiming the work for themselves.
Take it as a compliment, Kim, if that's what they do, because that's a fantastic result in terms of what you've sent through. If they've just copied and pasted everything, and put their name to it, then I would very much take that as a compliment. And Grace is right, it does give that credibility to it. We have some news sites that we work with, and some can be self-publishing ones, and it means your name goes on them as well, and it doesn't necessarily always work. as well as if you've got that more objective voice in it. So you can have benefits to both. I know
Kim has said it's quite a unique position for her because she's a reporter herself.
Yeah.
But there's a difference, I guess, isn't there, from getting your story placed into a news outlet to you reporting on a story where you've been commissioned to do that. And that's a completely different sell and a different workshop, really.
I think I'm just trying to hold on to that old part of me that was a journalist. So I just feel really precious about my byline, that's all.
You and Kirsty can have a one-to-one as former journalists and just like talk it through. I think you can support each other through that.
I'm still there with you, Kim. It's still something that would irk me as well. But I remember being on the news desk and you've written a story, you've come up with your great intro, and then your great intro gets changed because the sub-editor decides to nick it for their headline. But you have to just live with the fact that to take that as a compliment, because what you've written is something that they want to take in order to grab the attention of everybody who's reading it. So yeah, take it as a compliment, and we'll work through our issues together.
Claire said we had ours copied and pasted recently, and it was great because we got to say everything we wanted to say, full control. Well, that's exactly what we want you to achieve really from this workshop, that if you've written a great story and you've structured it in the right way, it's the ideal situation.
And everything was accurate, all the details, everything we wanted to say, our message, our angle. So in a way, the platform was just, I felt very kind of comfortable with what was being transmitted about our project. So yeah, it kind of worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and it sounds like you wrote it completely to the right length as well, because I think sometimes when the errors can come in for when journalists start chopping stuff out of people's stories and cutting it down, that sometimes it can lose the sense or the accuracy because it's been a bit of a quick hatchet job. So it sounds like you did a great job on that. So keep your checklist handy. Have a rant to me if you don't like that somebody's taken your byline. And then the next point I'm going to hand over to Grace, who's going to talk about how we sell in your stories. Do you want me to keep flicking through for you, Grace?
Yeah, that'd be great. So yeah, we'll take a few slides to think about the different ways we can identify news opportunities and opportunities to sell in your story. So first of all, another sort of simple checklist on how you sell in any press release. First of all, research your topic. And that means, quite simply, if you're expecting to be in the news, then start reading the news, not just your BBC top 10 most read, but who's writing about your topic, about your area of expertise. Get to read them and be really aware of who is writing these stories. Start following them on Twitter, telling them that you love that story and it really resonated with your work. So that's what we mean by research, and that leads on to that second point of you're then sending it to the most appropriate journalist. And if you have done a bit of that Twitter engagement to say love this piece, then you've also started to hopefully build up a relationship. When you've tweeted them, they could then go look at your account, which will hopefully be full of the good news stories and really advertise and showcase what it is that you do. So when you've got to the point where you've identified who you want to send it to, always send it to the news desk as well, because that's the catch-all. As Kirsty highlighted with an initial example about the Stockport Express going from 15 to 1 journalists in the newsroom, you might have your eye on a certain journalist, but capacity is a challenge, so make sure it goes to that main news desk email. And you can find that email address on any contact us, send us your news webpage on the news site that you're trying to target. Individual journalists may have their contact details on the website. They may be in bylines of their news stories, but they'll most likely be on Twitter as well. But you'll find that the format of an email address tends to take the same format of name, surname, at whatever it is that news channel is or publishing house is. So when you're sending it in, put the main press release in the body of the email. So don't mess about with attachments. See this Word document attached. As Kirsty's already highlighted, these reporters are pressed for time. They've got 299 emails on top of yours. So make it as easy as possible for them to access your story. Put it in the main body of the email. Make the email title, press release, and your idea for your headline. Finish it off and end that email by saying you've got a confident interviewee available, particularly if you're sending it to broadcast, so BBC Radio Manchester or ITV Granada News. Include your contact details and your web address so that they can check out more about you. Okay. Oh, Jess is leaving us, got an online class to teach. Busy day, Jess. Thanks for your time, super valuable. Glad that you find it useful. And yeah, if you've got any questions or you want to follow up what you missed, then just drop us a line afterwards. Kim, should a headline be less than 9 words, as I was taught at uni? Kirsty, are you there?
Disappeared.
Kirsty, can you unmute yourself?
Hi,
Cool.
sorry, yeah, I don't know what was happening then. Am I in the right one for you?
Yeah, Kim asks, should a headline be less than 9 words, as I was taught at uni?
It varies from publication to publication, but I was no more than 12 is what I would probably go on. So if you can see it all in the email header that you're sending, then that's fine. If it starts to go off onto the next, if it drips off the side, then that's too long. The reason I'm saying that there needs to be a bit of room for movement in that is that certain websites now, because a lot of the news sites are online, will have different ways of presenting headlines, or the way they'll do them, different fonts. 9 words or 12 words can mean different font types and faces will make a difference in that. But yeah, I would no more than 12 would be what I'd say.
And remember your pub test when trying to think of that headline. As simple and to the point as possible is how you would say it to somebody else, so that can help tighten up your headline. So the next few slides are examples of ways that you can identify news hooks, really, to sell in your news story. So one of them is sign up to gov.uk updates. There is likely to be a commission, a research group, something to do with your area of interest that the government is looking into, and they'll be releasing papers, press releases, calls for evidence, which you can get involved in, which is obviously great for you as an organisation, but can provide that news hook. So you've got that case study ready and waiting about mums affected by COVID. There could be an equalities update that comes out, which you can link into. So have a look at gov.uk. You can see there's a search bar there. Start looking at the different departments and groups that you could sign up to email updates from, so that you can keep ahead of the news and start tying in your news stories to the government and sector updates. Another handy way of keeping ahead of the news and identifying opportunities is signing up to free Google alerts. So if you follow that link or type it into your search bar, you can create alerts that then get emailed straight to your inbox, and it could be about your organisation, and it will pick up where your organisation has been mentioned online, competitors, key words in your sector. Try and be specific as possible, otherwise you're going to get inundated. So for example, we run an online news platform for over 50s, so we have a news alert that comes in over 50s and over 50s Greater Manchester, so we know exactly what the national press conversation is about that topic, and we can then use that to sell in our story. So a great free tool that we definitely recommend you using. Finally, this one's already been mentioned by Kim, but a brilliant reactive opportunity is #journo request, which is used by reporters when they want a comment, an interview, a case study on a certain topic. They're usually looking at 1 or 2 days notice. They urgently want to speak to somebody. So it's great to keep a track on that hashtag, and then you can interact directly with the journalist who is looking for an interviewee in your field. Facebook can also be quite useful. There are relevant groups in your field that could be having these chats. There's stuff like podcast matchmaking groups where you could join and introduce yourself. If you're looking to become an interviewee for podcasts, they'll match you with podcast hosts. So have a little bit of a search really and see if there's any of these sort of matchmaking groups that could be relevant to you.
So yeah, those are all great tips. And the final piece of the jigsaw, no pun intended, is to do with photography. So we said at the beginning that we need great photos to go along with these great stories that you've all got and have been sharing in the chat. And so really, I just want to think about it from a phone perspective, because most of us have got smartphones these days. We all very much use do our photography from them. And most journalists, reporters, those who are out and about will be using smartphones too for any video or photo content that they use. So it's fine that you would be using a phone to be doing that. Really important, as in the first 3 of the easy steps, is to be thinking about how you plan your photo ahead of it. So you've got your story, you're thinking about how you want to show people knitting or kneading dough or whatever it is. Think about how you can set those stories up to get the best picture, because more often than not, it doesn't work when it's on the hoof unless it's something like a protest or something that you're showing in action. You need to be thinking about how you can stage those to tell the story. To try and do them, obviously do them ahead of when you would be wanting to issue a press release. Thinking about your rules of thirds, so that's breaking up the photo into into thirds, and then it means that you don't always have to have the person in the center of the photo. You can move them to the left or the right hand side. So the reason why you would do that is sometimes it's slightly more interesting. You can get the background of your organization in. We've seen it before where there've been people who say if it's a cafe, if you set the person to the right hand side of a photo, you can get the nice shop front of their cafe in, get the branding in there, but it doesn't look too promotional in the way that they're doing it. It's not like they're holding up a sign in terms of doing that. Other really easy ways of getting that kind of stuff in is, I'm just using the cafe example again, or something Heart and Parcel might want to do, like if you have aprons that you can wear, so you get your logos in there without actually saying here I am and pointing shiny arrows at it. So thinking about that, how it's best, and always trying to do it landscape. The reason why we say to go landscape with your photography is that if you have got if it is a person, if it's the CEO of your organization and they are the main focal point of the photo, it can still be a much more interesting photo using those rule of thirds. So if the journalist is going to place it on a page where it's still a landscape picture, then great, you've got an interesting photo. But it could be that they can only use 200 words and a small photo to go along with your story. So it gives them an option of changing that photo to portrait and only using a headshot of the CEO. Whereas if you just sent them a portrait image originally, that would mean that they haven't got the option of giving you that bigger space with the landscape photo. So always best to do it that way around, or take both. So you've got both options. If you're going to be using it for different forms of social media, you might want to make sure that you've got both options on those photos. Another little tip, I've just realised we put 3 easy steps on here, Grace, and we've added a 4th.
I know, yeah, I have mentioned that in the chat.
So writing's my strong point, not adding. So we're thinking about that in terms of having a few people in your pictures. There's a few reasons why we like this when they land on our news desks. Having groups of 3 people works really well in a picture. It means you can have the close-ups of them. It can be framed nicely. It means we can name everybody in the photo and say where they're from. And a little rule on that is that if you think you're close enough when you're taking the picture, take another step in, because if you're not making the people uncomfortable who you're taking the picture of, then you're probably not close enough. So think about that as to how you would present that and how you do the setup and what else you've got in the shot. Another caveat around that is obviously if you're doing a world record breaking attempt as to how many people you can fit into a telephone box or a Mini Cooper or whatever it is that you're trying to do, then obviously you need to have as many people as possible in that picture. So protests, rallies, all of that kind of thing is where you would break that wall in terms of having fewer people in the shot. Here's just a few examples, all of which have been taken by me on a smartphone, but I'm hoping that a lot of these photos tell the story for us. So top right hand corner, if you haven't guessed it, then it's for World Book Day, but this is where it brings that rule of thirds to life. So we've got our people in the middle, we've got the ideal number of 3, they're all bright and colourfully dressed, illustrating that it's World Book Day, but we've provided a more interesting shot and a frame to it by putting the books around the side. So instead of just what you see a lot of people just being stood in a line or a row, then you just have to try and think of a different and new way that's going to grab the attention of the journalist, because this is a fine example about how many stories they would get through on that one day of the year when kids are dressing up for World Book Day. So make yours stand out for people. The one in the middle, so again, the reason I've chosen this as an example is not to have them all stood in a straight line as a row. It's so that you can get those different and interesting angles. They're not in the centre of the picture. Diagonals always work really well in photos, which you've got as the way they've lined up as people, but also in the shadows, so it's presented on the pitch for them. Bottom right hand is a good example of how you get your branding in there. So this was for Beechwood and with Key 103 and UK Fast. So put people in front of a board that has your branding on it, then it's a great way to bring that to life. Bottom left hand corner, I'm hoping you can guess, was for a Teddy Bears Tea Party. And although it was for a cancer care charity, that wasn't the story. The story was that these kids were enjoying a Teddy Bears picnic. And you get your organisational information in there after that. So that cute picture means that we would get a bigger space than illustrating it just with a teacup or with the CEO holding something, rather than getting the children there and making sure we get that nice angle in for the story. And although it breaks the wall in the top left-hand corner because it's a portrait picture, that worked for that particular publication because of the way it presented photos and it's illustrating them having some works. So this was a fundraising manager, grabbed a few things out of their garage, making sure that you can tell the story through the picture that they are going to be starting some building works. So just trying to have a little bit of a thought process behind the pictures that you're taking and planning them in, rather than just point and shoot, is probably the biggest tip for that. Over to you again, Grace.
Great, so we're in the final 10 minutes now. So one last task for you to do. To start, we don't expect you to complete it now, but we'd love for you to start thinking about potential news stories for the next 12 months, but let's see you get on in the next 5 minutes doing that, including what the news story would be and what you think would make a good accompanying photo. So take inspiration from any milestones or successes you have planned, whether it is X amount of people you've worked with, an anniversary, launch of a new project, end of a project. Long term, you can look at awarenessdays.co.uk as a way of tying in what you're doing to a wider story, such as the example Kirsty shared of World Book Day. And then obviously we've talked about Google Alerts, Journalink and gov.uk updates, where you could think, right, I know that there's a report coming out by the Equalities Commission in September, particularly about women. So I'm going to be ready to do a story based in Greater Manchester of how our organisation has been helping people in this situation. So if we have 5 minutes just jotting down your ideas for stories coming up, that would be great. And if you want to share the next story you think that you could have a go at in the chat, fantastic. Because we're not going to have time to complete that task, then the takeaway is send your draft plans to us if you'd like feedback, and we can hammer it out with you so that you've got a decent plan. Now, you don't have to be having ideas every week. If you're going from 0 to 2 or 3 a year, then that is a massive achievement. So yeah, give it a go. And we'll be back in, well, let's say 5 to 12.
And what I will say is, although, you know, this is a takeaway and you don't have to do it, one of the asks that we have got is that for those people on the Resilient Leaders Programme who are looking to access that intensive media support, so at least today's support with Grace and Kirsty, to have an initial kind of thinking and planning meeting, and then have some additional time with them, potentially even helping create some content or help broker connections with the media to get those stories out. We are asking that you do complete this task so that we can get some insight on your organisation, the story that you think is important, or an initial story that you think is important, and it will just help us when we've got some difficult decisions to make. I think there's probably 20 to 30 women who might want this support, and currently we've only got budget to work with 10 of them. So yeah, this is just one of the little tasks that we're asking that you complete for us in the next week or so. I don't know, Grace might have some deadlines that she wants you to work to, I don't know, but certainly, you know, in the next week or so, having that come back will help with the decision making.
Thanks, Michaela.
No problem.
Yeah, Karen, we'll give a deadline. There's this and another task that we just want to repeat, and then we'll wrap all that up with when we'd like it by. But don't feel at all like this isn't passing a test. This is about sharing ideas, and our job is to mold those ideas into press opportunities. But we don't know what's going on in your organisation, so this is the opportunity to understand that. Just a note on lead times as well. When we are planning out this year of news opportunities, think about the lead times for different publications. So Kirsty's already mentioned that magazines have 3 to 4 months, which means you're not going to get a lockdown story in the magazine now. They're planning Christmas stories, whereas your regional press like the MEN, your BBCs are 1 to 2 days notice. So that is going to affect what you plan and who you target. Blossoms outside LGBT Centre. Tina, I'm there. That is amazing. And Ian McKellen.
Oh, well, I'm there for that one.
Star power, do not underestimate it. Especially a very local one like Blossoms, and how passionate they are about their local town.
Yeah, Blossoms always make the news if it's Stockport or Greater Manchester, because they just do so much for their areas. Same goes for Siri and McKellen, to be fair, as well.
Claire's got an interesting question. What tips would you give in terms of dividing, managing and setting aside time for PR and media? Do you have a good routine that you would suggest that works? I think it's a combination of things, a combination of processes that will make this easier. So I've already talked about laying the foundations, starting to build that infrastructure of a database, a bank of case studies within your organisation. That's the first tick to make any of this being reactive and responding to news opportunities easier, because you'll already have started identifying people and having the conversation with them that if a media opportunity arose, would you be up for it? Without that, that task can be the success or failure to even getting through to writing a press release, because it can slow things down so much. The other processes, such as having your updates from Google Alerts, having your updates from gov.uk, and then having your plan of, we're launching this in September, we're ending this in November, and it's going to present a great news opportunity, will help you understand how much time you can realistically set aside. And it's going to be different for every organisation. But if you've got that plan and you know the PR potential, you can then assess, right, how much time do I realistically have? And if I've only got this amount and I've got this many stories, what should we really focus on?
Yeah, I think the important thing is not to always think of it as an added extra, that it should be integral to be what you do as an organisation.
Definitely. But
Thank
the
you.
processes and habits help. Like, are you reading your news? Are you reading the news in your area? Are you on top of the Gov updates? And then it'll naturally form part of what you do, which, you know, it should. We're all social enterprises who are trying to be leaders in our field and advocates for the people that we work with. And that's a very important part of doing that work. Are you going to say something, Claire? Sorry.
Oh no, I was just going to say thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary to have that media, and so as Kirsty said, it's important to embed it work it into the everyday workings of the project as well. I sometimes struggle because it feels like I'm doing everything. I'm sure everyone is the same. So it's quite hard. Yeah, it's the same. It's the classic burnout. So just trying to get like a really nice structure of like posting 3 times a week, or you know, trying to which days are better to post on, and just things like that really.
We try to steer clear of this amount at this time and when's the best time to post, purely because it's different for each organisation, and we don't want to set anybody up to fail. So keep the targets low to begin with, so that it doesn't start feeling onerous. And it could be that there's one PR opportunity a month that you really want to go for, and the reality is you might not get in the press, but how else can you use that story? If your plan B is always that you're going to get the outcome of a really great case study or a blog for your website that you can send to your supporters, your influencers, your partners via email, that you can promote on your LinkedIn, that you can use on your Twitter, then this is never going to be a task that is going to be pointless, because you're always going to get decent content, even if it's not in use.
And then 2 months down the line, a journal request comes in for X, Y, and Z case study, and you've already got the content there and done, ready to go, because
that's a good idea.
Process.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. Thank you.
In terms of when is the best time to post, we touched upon this on another workshop on Saturday, and it really is unique to every organisation. So if you've got a Facebook page, for example, or stick with Facebook, you've got a Facebook page, it will give you all the insights to tell you when you're getting the most engagement from your posts. So that is going to be specific to you. And the same with your Google Analytics. We get far fewer visitors to most of our websites at the weekend, so we wouldn't necessarily post something on a Saturday. And on our Facebooks, we usually post something a bit more trivial, if you like, because we know it's not going to get that massive reach, but that is specific to each organisation's analytics.
Great, that's really useful. Thank you.
You got a great Guardian piece a few years ago, didn't you? Did I dream that?
Yeah, we did. I think that's always been the case with us. We don't search for it and it falls into our lap. We've been quite lucky with that, and I kind of now want to turn my strategy a bit more kind of focused and driven onto the different areas that we'd like to reach, because yes, the Guardian was great, and then we developed what we found with journalists. We've developed really good relationships with them, and they've actually worked in our favour, because we've then been able to get repeat articles in different in different newspapers. And because freelance journalists as well, they know, I think you mentioned it earlier, Kirsty, they know to go back to that story, they know who you are, so they know that they're going to get a good story from you. So that's been really good. But I just want to get a bit more driven, a bit more structured now.
Great. It's 1 minute to 12, so I think what we'll say is pause the task now, and we will return to it. Thank you for those that have already shared their next steps for their stories in the chat. We'll be saving the chat and going through these. So thanks to Val, thanks to Kim and Tina. We've already done the shout out to Blossoms, which is really exciting. Do you want to go on to the next slide, Kirsty?
Yeah, sure.
So this is just to recap that there are 2 takeaway tasks from this workshop, particularly we advise for everybody so that you start to become seen and heard by your audiences. But for those on the Resilient Leaders programme that are interested in accessing the intensive support, we would really like you to have a go at writing your own press release in this takeaway task, and have a go at completing that previous task. Could be 6, it could be 12 months, depending on how lockdown has affected your services. But to be able to have an idea of where you think the opportunities are in your organisation, just as a starting point, would be really helpful. And if we could have them by a week today, that would be brilliant. So what date is that? 1st of July. Nice one to remember.
Awesome. And yeah, that'll just help us make some decisions quickly so that we can then know who we can support. And I think I'm not mistaken in saying that Grace and Kirsty are obviously happy to receive press releases from everyone and anyone in the group here today, and we'll can give some tips and some feedback on those, and we'll be looking at finding 10 women through our Resilient Leaders programme to offer that intensive support to. Like I say, it's about 8 hours, which we imagine would look like a couple of hours sort of media strategy planning with a further chunk of time looking at some practical stuff. So fingers crossed and good luck to everyone on that. I have got another bit of homework for anybody who's up for it, and some of you probably been emailed already about this, in case anyone can help us. Just in the chat now, I've just put in a little request. Some people have been involved in our podcast before, so we use our podcast as a way to kind of inspire and enthuse, but also to act as a bit of an additional training resource and development resource for people. And it helps raise awareness of lots of different social enterprises and women-led social enterprises that we work with. Oh, that's good news, Kim. Well, we definitely need your homework.
Congratulations.
So we have just put a toolkit out. I don't know if you've had it. We've been sharing it far and wide, called Flourishing Beyond COVID. You could do hashtag Flourishing Beyond COVID and you'll see it. It's on our website. It's the most recent blog. And basically, the next podcast is called Show Me the Money, to sort of help sort of promote this. And we're just looking for some Vox Pops again. So in the chat there, I've just put, in case anybody can, basically on your mobile phone, using your voicemail recorder, if you have had funding in the last few months through a kind of COVID response fund or some other fund, it would be great to just hear about that. And we'll put a handful of these Vox Pops in the podcast, partly to promote your who you are. So the things we're asking you to record just very quickly in 1 or 2 minutes is who you are and what you do. A fund or a couple of funds, so it might even be resources, might not be money. I know Val on the call here today, she has been getting resources and getting donations of stuff, so it doesn't have to be grants or cash that way. It might be that you've been successful in getting other resources that you've been able to use and repurpose to benefit the social issues that you're trying to address. So it's kind of who you are, what you've secured, and a top tip for funding or fundraising success. And I put my email address there so you can send those to us. Rana and I are nobbling people in the next few days for that, so you're very welcome to send those over, and we'll include those as many as we can.
Nicola, are you wanting this content to be sent back to you, or do you want it to be sent straight to us? I think on the next slide we've got contact details, Kirsty.
I think the press releases and what you need goes to you, and okay, the Vox Pop that I was just asking for, that I've put the details in the chat, can come to me.
Kirsty, can you just go on to the last slide, and it's got my contact details on there.
Sorry, last slide,
yeah. You've got the press release template already, haven't you, Nicola, to send out? But I've said that I'll send a media consent form template as well. Mm-hmm. So I'll send that after this call. So if that can be sent along with the press release template, you're all good to go.
Cool. Okie dokie. I'm just thinking whether we need any final thoughts, points, what we're doing. Yeah, it's just gone 12, so we're all right.
Thanks, Iyabe. Speak to you soon.
Yeah, and thanks, Iyabe. Iyabe's actually in our podcast. I meant to say, you're one of our key interviews this time, Iyabe, so thank you for that. And
I haven't heard it yet. I hope it's helpful.
Oh, it'll definitely be helpful. It's coming out on around the 6th of July, so we'll be sharing that through emails and Twitter and whatnot. But thank you very much.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. It was great. Really good.
Good. Glad to hear it.
Thank you.
Yes.